Welcome back to another Book Thoughts. This one's going to be a little different, a little more ranty than normal. I'm going to try to keep it coherent, but I can't make any promises because this book pissed me off. Alright, what are we talking about? Henry Clay, America's Greatest Statesman, by Harlow Unger. This book is garbage. We're just going to start off with that. I'm going to actually, that's starting at mild. We're going to take it another step further. This book is a straight out case of historical malpractice. What's the problem with this book? Well, let's start with what it is. It's a biography of Henry Clay from, parents-ish, birth, that era, or that part of his life, all the way to his death, and then a little bit about his impact shortly after his death. Makes sense. That structure makes sense. But let's talk about what's so terrible in this book. We're going to start mild. We're going to start mild here with the utter state of its organization. Okay? So you would think that being able to tell a chronological tale of one person's life wouldn't be confusing, wouldn't be that challenging. And yet, Unger manages this. Excuse me. He manages to hide, basic information about what's happening in a way that utterly confounds his narrative. He focuses on bizarre points without stringing them together into a cohesive whole. Not only that, he fails to even provide us a central thrust of Henry Clay's life other than the fact that he was a great negotiator. He was the great negotiator. He held the Union together. That was what he worked towards, yes. But he didn't give us anything more than that. I just told you the whole point of the book in, 6 words? 7 words? Something like that? Why did we need 300 pages for that? That's the top of the Wikipedia article. Okay, to make matters more confusing, as we go through this book, we have major events happen and just kind of lost in the confusion of its organization. I missed the point when Henry Clay became Speaker of the House. When Henry Clay, let me remind you, became one of the most powerful speakers of the House in U.S. history, bar none. I somehow missed how this happened. There was other times where, for most of the time, he referred to him as Henry Clay or Clay. Makes sense. Occasionally, whenever the position that Henry was in was relevant to what we were talking about, he would drop the title in there. Makes sense. If he's acting as Secretary of State Henry Clay did this. Makes sense. Senator Henry Clay did this. Makes sense. What doesn't make sense is when we have times where he's not a senator, but still referred to as Senator Clay. Because, one of the examples is shortly after the John Quincy Adams administration in 1830, Henry Clay doesn't have a job. Well, a government job. And so whenever he talks about so-and-so approached Senator Clay, I was like, wait, did I just miss this again? Since apparently we just don't talk about when people have major life changes sometimes. We just drop it in like that. No, 3 pages later, we get to, in 1832, Henry Clay goes back to the Senate. What is this? I do not understand what rational human being purposefully tries to obfuscate their own story and make it so bizarre and impossible to read. I don't understand. Okay, that is the least sin in this book. Okay. Next, we know that in popular histories, which this is, a lot of times authors tend to put their figure at the center. Okay? And people who agree with them are great, and people who impose their ways, who stood in their way, tend to be villains. I mean, obvious exceptions, like, no one's making Hitler out to be the hero of the story whenever you have a serious book about Hitler. But for someone like Henry Clay, it's very natural to do that. Well, this does that. But that's not the sin I want to talk about. I want to talk about how. Well, okay. Slow down. We're going to slow down. Another common sin is to put your figure in the center of every major event that happens in their life, and to downplay events that they aren't the center of, right? Makes sense. Okay. This book, we're going to go reverse orders in those common things. Basically, according to this book, literally, Henry Clay was the prime mover and impetus for everything good in his whole political career. There weren't like even someone like Daniel Webster, another who was a equally important figure in the period, is moved and demoted to being like, the short round of this. It's ridiculous. Short round from Temple of Doom. Just like totally irrelevant, other than the fact that they work together, but it always seemed to be under Clay's direction. Everything always seemed to be under Clay's direction, and Clay always had these great ideas that were just perfect, and if they weren't perfect, or if they didn't happen, it's only because of villainy. It was always because of villainy. And this brings us to our second great problem. It's very easy to oversimplify the not main figure in biographies. Everyone else. Very easy to oversimplify them. Very tempting to. And to a certain point you have to, because you can't go into them as much depth as your subject. Because then you're just literally writing the life story of everyone. It just doesn't work. However, this book seems to go out of its way to mischaracterize people in the grandest fashions possible, and in ways that are flabbergasting. I mean, here's the greatest example. So it talks about how Henry Clay was a very wise man who was one of the founding members of the American Colonial Society, something along those lines. The group of slave owners who wanted to free the slaves and settle them back in Africa. Think what you want of that idea. In this book, it's presented as genius, because everything Henry Clay does in this book is presented as genius. But Henry Clay was a member of that, a founding member of that, pushed that as a solution to ending slavery. We have a figure who Henry Clay had political fights with, in the Senate. Important to note, Henry Clay was a slave owner. This other figure was John Randolph of Roanoke, a very influential figure in the House at the time. And he is cast as a raving lunatic who at one point is quoted as saying, quoted one step removed, as saying that he would rather that he would shoot all of his slaves if everyone else would do it too. And an avowed defender of slavery and all of these things. Slight problem. John Randolph of Roanoke was another founding member of the same society, and in his will, he not only freed all of his slaves, but he set up a trust to buy them all independent land in Ohio, a free state. Does this sound like the raving slave owner who cares not for the lives of his slaves that this book is portraying? Does it? It even engages in more ridiculous sins. Okay, so the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were signed during the Adams presidency, he portrays as John Adams going power mad and attacking the freedom of speech. John Adams appears to have neither supported nor opposed the laws, and we do have evidence that he was not comfortable signing the laws until Abigail, who was his most trusted advisor, said, "This is what the people wanted, sign the laws." This is portrayed as him being power mad. At the same time, during the Andrew Jackson years, the president not signing something passed by both houses of Congress is portrayed as a nearly treasonous act against the will of the people. But see, in the one case, Henry Clay was against it, and then in the other one, he was for it. It's not even self-consistent. It's not even self-consistent. Then another one that just drives me up the wall was, there's at one point he talks about, preserving the country that Washington made, that George Washington made. George Washington was one of the most pivotal figures in the founding of the country. Absolutely. He did not make the country by himself. He didn't deal with the diplomacy of the Revolutionary era, without which there would be no America. He did not write the Constitution. He presided over the Constitutional Convention. However, he was not the one just crafting it. How you could, with a straight face, write the country George Washington made does not make sense. And to be clear, in this case, we are not talking about the talking about the precedents for presidency that he set, or how the executive branch operated following his example. No, he literally meant the existence of the United States. That does such a disservice to not only all of the people who, put their lives or gave their lives for this, but also the intellect of your readers. Come on. Come on. Okay. So, we've covered those. There was another point that, in my rage, I am forgetting. What was the last point? Okay. Pardon me. It's not even important. This book is historical fan fiction where we just throw out all the rules of reality and just say Henry Clay did it all. I don't even know what to it's just levels of frustrating. And I know enough about the period, and I know enough about history and how history works, the academic study of history, and how you go about being intellectually honest, that I can read this book get angry as all get out, but know what's happening here. This is a popular history book. People are just going to go off and read this and think that it's true. That was the last point. Okay. So, throughout the whole book, the author had, Harlow Unger, had this knack for picking, for whenever anything would come up that in a lot of things in history we don't know. We make arguments, we make interpretations, and we present evidence, and we argue for our evidence. That's just how it works. We don't get to know everything. Anytime we hit anything like that, which was often, he just picked out a interpretation and just presented it to you as fact. That's total bupkis. And I don't care if it's a popular history. People who are reading about Henry Clay can take a thing of, this is the interpretation of this, because it doesn't screw up the narrative structure, which we've already covered was screwed up by many other sins. It would be fine. It'd be great. It's great when you do that. It's just good writing. Not only does he not do that, he seemed to have a knack for picking the most buck wild interpretations every time. I think because it made Henry Clay look like the only sane man in a madhouse. But why? Henry Clay doesn't need you to boost him up. He is one of the most pivotal figures of the post-revolution pre-war period. One of the most pivotal figures, and especially of the post, say, 1815, 1820, somewhere in there. Post there to his death, one of the most influential figures, bar none. Bar none. I mean, just that's what he was. And his impact on so much of how we approach things today is still it's lasting. You don't need to make stuff up to make Henry Clay look better. So, I feel better for having ranted. As I often say, these book thoughts are for me, and I'm glad that some people like to watch them. That's great. But they're for me to get things off my chest, and I feel much better having gotten this off my chest. I need to go and read a actually good history book now, because my heart hurts. Tell me what you thought. If you've come across this book, or if you've come across things like it, if you have the same frustrations, sound off. I need company in my misery here. Other than that, just comment, like, subscribe, whatever. I'll catch you guys around some other time. All right, have a good one.